Hello, everyone. Welcome to this latest episode of the Antelope Hill Book Club podcast. We are your hosts. My name is Taylor Young.
And I'm Sean Bell, and I just wanted to open this podcast up with a formal apology to all the listeners, because from me at least, you're about to hear a bunch of waffling and just total lack of self-assuredness or any sort of confidence in my point of view, because we are going to be discussing history. And Taylor, I don't know if you know this. I've been misrepresenting myself all this time. I'm like a dumb guy, and I'm not very well read. All I can say for myself is that I've read enough to, you know, the graph of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I've read the actual spike in oneself, and I'm like very low confidence in anything, and very few opinions.
Oh
Yeah, it's
boy.
one of
Well,
one
we
of the
we have an imposter on the call.
Yeah, man, it's just one of those weird things about getting towards middle age. It's like I have so much beliefs when I was 20 years old and first read a book. So the book is called When Israel is King. It is an Antelope Hill release. I don't know if you have any more biography on the authors than I
Not
do. I certainly do not.
not really. I believe they were French novelists, and they wrote a number of books, and that's really all that I know about them.
Yeah, so I don't know, again, like as a half-educated person, I generally expect to like when the name of a known quantity, a known person in the intellectual world comes up, I generally know them. Not familiar names to me. I don't know if this is a case where great novelists who said, well, things about our Abrahamic friends maybe have some bad consequences happen to them, or what it is, but certainly this book made me want to read their fiction. However, this is more of a memoir slash history. It's the history of Hungary leading up to and in the aftermath of World War One, and it has a focus on, well, the fall of the aristocratic class, the fumbling of the ineffectual bourgeoisie and their failure to constitute what we would recognize as a sort of Western European liberal order, and then the rise of the rise of the Jews who came from the Pale of Settlement, filtering down from, well, what was once Poland and was partitioned into Russia, as well as the Austro-Hungarian Empire's holdings in Galicia, which is now Western Ukraine. And these Jews came into Hungary. They did what they did, climbed the economic and political ladder, and when the moment was right at the end of World War One, they set in place a short-lived Soviet Republic on the territory of Hungary, uh, with money from the Jewish Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union, and basically did what Jewish Bolsheviks do with all of the dysfunction and terror that entails. However, in the case of Hungary, happily, and unlike in the Soviet Union, that experiment came to a halt after just 4 months. And basically, that interlude is what the book is about. It's told through various prisms, through the experiences of the author, who lived and worked in Budapest as a professor of French language and literature, as well as through biographies of three important political figures, each of whom is emblematic of those three phases that I talked about: the tragic decline and fall of the old aristocratic order, the ineffectual bumbling of the idealistic liberals, and then the brutal, cynical Jewish interlude before Hungary. If I'm being honest, I don't know what happened to Hungary after this. I know that there was a Hungarian Republic, up until the Second World War, when they ended up a socialist satellite state of the Soviet Union. But frankly, I couldn't tell you all that much about what happened to Hungary afterwards. I couldn't tell you that much about Hungary generally, if I'm being perfectly frank. And yeah, that was one of the things that I thought maybe we could discuss a bit, like how interesting it was to hear some history that's from the point of view of one of the actors that's not generally considered one of the main characters, and what you think, Taylor, about the typology that we see sort of implied in the book between great nations and nations like the Hungarians, which the author thinks are of a sort of simpler, more rustic, and beautiful in their own way, but not necessarily so grandiose as other type nations. Very, very bad way of tying up that question, but do you see what I'm getting at, and do you have a response?
Yeah, so I think the author certainly has his conceits as a French person. He definitely thinks that France is the best country on earth and comes to the defense of the French and their actions in some of the events later on in the book. So I'm sure from his perspective, he'd probably break it down into places like France and Germany are the great nations, the big chess players, and Hungary's role is to be a little pawn that somebody moves around. But I guess maybe that's not entirely fair. The very first part of the book, it goes very briefly, but it goes way back into Hungarian history, and it basically talks about how Hungary has always been this bulwark of Christian Europe against Asia, against the Muslim hordes and the Ottomans, and how
Well,
it.
not always. Sorry to interrupt, but an interesting part of the story is actually that the Hungarians, according to popular myth, and this is also mentioned in the book, they arrived. They were the Asiatic hordes at one point, and yeah, we talked about this briefly yesterday, but I found the name of the thing that I was talking about. Turanism is the name of this sort of nationalist mythology that Hungarians have about themselves as being Turkic steppe people, conquering horse guys who thundered across the Eurasian steppe and pillaged Christian Europe before at some point being won over to the side of Europe and becoming that bulwark. Little, I don't know, that's just a side note, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I have heard that word before. I think for the purposes of the book, the Hungarians have largely been assimilated into Christendom, and the author treats them as part of Europe, even if they do have part of that heritage that they sometimes harken back to. But yeah, so they resist the onslaught of Asia for a long time. Then they are conquered at one point and then freed again by the Habsburgs, I think, if I remember correctly. And I believe it's since then that they end up as part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which kind of takes us back to the present day. And then at the very end, the author kind of brings it back to that history, and but in this case, it's the Jews that are representative of the dark forces of the East that Hungary has perhaps not so successfully repelled. The author, honestly, it's the way the book treats the Jews is interesting because I felt like it's not as negative as it could have been. Or maybe I should say it's not as polemical as it could have been. Do you have any thoughts about that? About like, despite everything that it describes the Jews as doing, how it, I don't know, talks about them in the author's own voice.
I first of all, I totally know what you're saying. Like especially in the dialogue at the end. Well, so
Yeah.
so the one, yeah, the one of the last chapters of the book is a dialogue between the Christian and the Jew, who are obviously just types that the author is imagining for himself. Well, first of all, it's always more interesting to me to invoke sort of a what's it called? It's like making a steel man is more interesting than making a straw man, right? And trying
Okay.
to imagine, yeah, I don't know,
Hmm.
trying to me that's more interesting, right? Trying to imagine how this would I don't know, and look, I guess I don't believe that even Jews are going through life thinking like, yes, I'm the bad guy. I am wreaking destruction because of my wanton ill will, right? You have to have some story about yourself where you're the good guy, right? So you would imagine that the Jews are thinking something like the notion of them sincerely making an effort to assimilate and in some ways becoming more Hungarian than the Hungarians and really like taking a weird enthusiastic pride in these traditions and language that are not theirs, but yet unconsciously it gets warped within them and becomes this other thing. That strikes me as more likely than like, yeah, we're just evil and scheming. Was that the sort of stuff you were talking about in the book, or?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting that idea. We're more you than you guys are. That seems to be a commonly repeated refrain that they have. I believe it comes up in you Gentiles as well.
Oh, you know who else does that? It's the mold bug argument, right? The Jews are so assimilated that they believe in a more pure and consistent strain of Anglo-Protestant liberalism that goes from like the Puritans and becomes secularized through the abolitionist sort of Unitarian tendency, and and the Jews assimilated to that, and that's why they're all shit libs. But really, the underlying thing is like pure true Americanism. It's the same sort of thing.
And that's why they control both sides of government in every institution because they're the true liberals. They've assimilated better than us. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's not true, but
But
could they believe
it's one of
that?
their favorite conceits, I suppose, or at least one of their favorite defenses that they have, which is it's an interesting question to contrast those two things. Like to what degree are they do they genuinely believe it? What would that even mean? It seems to be at least a common Jewish refrain, this idea that there are an even more perfect or well-formed representation of what of the Gentiles' own culture. I guess it's interesting to consider whether it's something they genuinely believe or not, or what that even means.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, clearly it doesn't mean anything. It's like so to the audience, we're recording this on the day after the movie podcast, so that's why I have like references to that conversation coming back in my head. We were talking about a non-white character in that movie who, maybe he's making sincere efforts, but still his presence is damaging to us, and that's really the important thing. Same sort of thing ultimately in terms of like whether Jews believe what they're saying. But intellectually, yeah, it's definitely interesting. I think it's repeated often enough that I don't know. Do you think that people? This is a very general question, but do you think that like maybe I'm being a total naive goy, but I find it hard to believe that like different Jews in different times and contexts are all like somehow coordinating this lie, right? And they are writing whole books about things that are not actually what they believe, and really they're just malevolent. I guess I don't know. I guess I could believe that
So,
it is true.
what would be an example? What do you mean specifically? You say like writing whole books about stuff they don't actually believe.
Well, so like another book that I think says a similar thing to what we're talking about right now, like the mold bug thing, the argument that's described in When Israel is King, is The Jewish Century by Yuri Slezkine. I don't know if you've read that one. It's a very interesting book where he argues at great length, bringing in a bunch of sources. It's a well done book in my opinion, and he argues that basically the Jews were the ones who really took the Enlightenment seriously, whereas the Goyim, and he's half Goy, so he's like, well, from the Gentile perspective, Enlightenment liberalism is not in contradiction with traditional Europe. It's something that grows organically out of it, so you don't have to throw everything away, whereas the Enlightenment is in total contrast to the shtetl darkness of Jewish culture in the Pale of Settlement, which these Jews sincerely were revolted by and wanted to throw away, and therefore they wanted to do away with all of traditional Europe. I don't know. As I remember that book, that was sort of the core of his argument: is that there's this sort of a fundamental tragic misunderstanding, rather than the sort of malevolence that it often looks like to us Goyim watching them destroy things.
It's a it's an interesting question. I think it's pretty core to what the book is. So maybe let's approach it this way. If the Jews were more Hungarian than the Hungarians themselves, and they came and they offered all of their work ethic and their thrift and their intelligence and their financial schemes, and that was all for Hungary's benefit. And they were all these Jews that came in from everywhere. They were raising their Jewish kids to be aspirationally Hungarian. Then why did it end up in the Hungarian Soviet Republic and not in something else?
Ah, here I am, the defense attorney for the Jews. Maybe, good lord, maybe Hungary is just an idea. It's always just been an idea, and it's a cuisine, and it's a language that anybody can. If you sit down with the books, you can learn the language. It's a thing that's open to everyone. It's fluid, and it has nothing to do with blood or soil. And yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it certainly looks like it has to do with blood and soil if it's generally one blood that is discriminated against the other one.
Well,
Um,
and yet we are Hungarian, are we not? We Jews, right?
yeah,
Aren't we the proof? Aren't we the proof? We have climbed the ladder of this society, that we are dragging Hungarian intellectual life and commerce and industry out of the darkness of the Middle Ages, where there was nothing good, of course, right? It was just the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsions of my people. I mean,
mhm.
that religious group that you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, we're
I
redoing the dialogue basically.
yeah, well, and at the end of the day, like we said, it doesn't really matter, right? Like whatever you believe or don't believe, whatever your motivations might be or might not be, there's a material substantial conflict of interest, and whatever good intentions our Jewish friends might have in their hearts for us, I will say thanks, but no thanks. I would rather you not be in charge of all the institutions in my country.
It reminds me of one of the observations that Wyndham Lewis brought out in Paleface about this idea that you can have one group that has a certain idea or a certain way of being, which is perfectly fine for them and it helps them thrive. But if you try to transplant it onto a different one, then it's going to kill them.
hmm Yeah, well, and we see that, like, there's the obvious case of the Jews trying to be Hungarian, and that doesn't work. There's also the case that's less at the center of the book, but this French author deplores the way that Hungarian intellectual life has become Germanized. I'm just going to read sort of a lengthy quote because I think that it's good. So he's talking about Hungarians. The things they love and understand with all their power and ingenuity is life on the Great Plains, where corn and vines and maize ripen, and where immense herds of cattle, horses, and sheep are pastured. On this subject, they possess a charmingly fantastic literature, at the same time realistic and spiritual, in which one sees the shepherd sharing fraternal sentiments with his beasts. It never rises above the modest limits of a tale, but within those bounds it is perfect. Ah, why do these Hungarians want to think in German fashion when they would be so charming if they remained quite simply as nature had made them? How many of them, by doing so, have lost the qualities of a race which remain close to the soil, without acquiring in exchange the painstaking virtues of the Germans, if one can describe as virtues an infinity of faults and a sad deformation of human mentality?
Yeah,
So,
he really is not a fan of the Germans.
He's- and yet he spends 4 years with the portrait of Bismarck looking
Yep.
down on him. Do you have? There was an interesting quote. I don't know if you will. Yes, he refers to Bismarck as the faraway author of this immense calamity, the calamity being World War One.
Hmm.
And I was, can you tell me why that was Bismarck's fault? Is it just like a French guy saying, well, Germany should never have tried to be a unified country because that was inconvenient for us, and that was why World War One happened? Or is there, do you,
Honestly, I am not familiar enough with the history either, which would be very embarrassing as a member of this publishing house. But I would guess it's something like that. I will say that the occasional books from this era that we've published that I read, most Europeans seem to have blamed the Germans at this time, the Italians as well. I mean, the Italians are on the
Mhm.
other side of the war from them, so it's and so are the French. But I think this kind of goes back to your question at the very beginning about the great nations and the small nations. and he has this rivalry with Germany. And I think it also ties into a little bit how he writes about the Jews. He thinks of himself as the French as one of these great power players of history. And so he wants to be able to consider other peoples in a certain way. And so he considers the Jews as just like another of these smaller nations. They may have some more unique characteristics than some of the others, and they may be a little bit more different, but I think he kind of like mentally places them in the same bracket, so to speak.
Hmm. Yeah,
I,
okay.
I think we should maybe talk a little bit more about the characters in the book.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I really like the way that it's written, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do it, even though it is technically a historical work. It's because it doesn't necessarily read like one. It reads like a novel in which you're learning about these characters kind of one by one and you it's like you were saying earlier, you see the events through the eyes of usually like one specific person or like a specific group of people, and then it moves on to the next chapter and you get a slightly different perspective on things. So I really like the way that it's written there. I don't know if you had any comments on that.
No, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. You can tell that it's written by a novelist, and yeah, each of these characters is very vivid, and I think I will, if I retain nothing else, I'll retain like sort of a feeling that goes along with those names when I hear them, right? Like I will have a, if anybody ever mentions Michel Carolier, I will immediately have a sense of what sort of guy that guy was. But yeah, I guess we should start with Tisza, right?
Yeah, so the first introductory characters are the author. The portrait of Bismarck is kind of a character in itself. Then the next character is basically Hungary and its history, as we've kind of talked about. And then you have the House of Orchy, which, if I remember correctly, was this physical location that I don't remember exactly how it started, but it was in Budapest and it basically ended up being colonized by the Jews and they turned it into like the Jewish center in Budapest. And then you have Count Tisza. So do you want to tell us about a bit about him?
Yeah, for sure. So Count Tisza, it's deceptive because SZ in Polish, which I think we see more Polish in America, is sh, but in Hungarian it's an S.
All
Oh,
right, I stand
uh, do
corrected.
you, do you know that in in German that letter that looks like a B, but it's an S, like a weird
Yes,
B.
I
So
learned
that's
that while working on the book Rebel Mountain. That's a like a hard S
in
sound.
yeah, it's a hard S sound and it's called SZ, which is
Hmm.
SZ. Right? So once upon a time, that would have been written SZ, and so
Oh,
if you look
okay.
at it, yeah, it's like
I
it's
can
actually
see
an
it.
S. Yeah, exactly. It's SZ just sort of squished together and made into one letter. Yeah.
Interesting.
So Tisa was so he is the son of minor nobility of a Calvinist strain, and in 1848, when, of course, all over Europe you have these liberal nationalist revolutions taking place, none of which were a smashing success, but all of which produced profound changes throughout the continent. The Hungarians rise against the Austrians, and Tisa's father is one of those Hungarians. So the fact that you have a nobleman joining this liberal national revolution. Taylor, I feel like I'm going to go off on a tangent here, so maybe rein me back in after a little while. But it's a very interesting thing that you see in various nationalities, particularly in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where you have these groups embracing liberal national sentiment, despite the fact that they themselves are very aristocratic, and there are other nations who are subsidiary to them that they wish to continue to treat as subject nations. So like the examples that come to my mind, in addition to Hungary, the other great example of this is Poland, where you see Poland being very inspired by the French Revolution. You have a great number of Poles who join Napoleon as he marches on Russia, and Polish nationalism of that time and Polish separatism, they express themselves in the language of sort of Western liberalism, despite the fact that, with respect to the Prussians, the Russians, and the Austrians, the Poles are a subject nationality. But with respect to the Poles, the people who are now Ukrainians were very much a subject nationality, and the Polish aristocrats, no matter how much they talked about liberalism, they were not meaning to give up their peasants, right? Same sort of thing with the Hungarians. They're in that same sort of pulled in two directions situation because with respect to the Austrians, they are a subject nationality, which is, offensive to their national pride. And you have people like the father of Prime Minister Tisza who go to join the liberal national revolution of 1848 to rise against the Austrians, despite the fact that this is very much like a democratizing, like the ideology of those revolutions is very much against the interests of the aristocratic class that those that people like him belong to. So that's an interesting dynamic which continues throughout the book, this desire to get out from under the Austrians' heel while still keeping their heel firmly on the heads of the Croatians and the Slovaks and the Romanians, who are the main subject nationalities who were directly under Hungarian rule. Anyway, so the father of Prime Minister Tisza returns from his fight against the Austrians. He is won over to the compromise solution of 1867, whereby Hungary accepted Austrian primacy in certain areas like foreign policy and the military in exchange for a great deal of autonomy within the Hungarian part of the empire. The way that he describes this mellowing of sentiment among noblemen like Tisa's father is pretty telling, and it's a thing that's repeated throughout the book. These guys would move from their country estates into Budapest or Vienna, and all of a sudden they'd start to understand, like, oh yeah, okay, in the broader context, really being buddies with Austria and being a subject of Austria is what's actually holding us together, what's stopping us from being ripped apart by basically the Slavic subject peoples that are located within the borders of historical Hungary. So you have these noblemen making their way into the cities and sort of losing that Hungarian desire for independence, becoming reconciled to Austria and thus also to broader Germany. Um,
Yeah,
in
that's
any
a. I was just gonna say I thought you were done. It's gonna go off of that.
Please, yeah, we can get back to. So we're still talking about Tisa's father.
Yeah,
We're gonna put a bookmark here, and you can go, and then we'll get to Tisa the son, who is one of the main characters here.
yeah. This is a very good summary, and you picked up on what I also noticed. One of the very interesting dynamics in the book. This commentary on, I guess you could call petty nationalism, or this like more short-sighted nationalism of the Hungarians, where yeah, they didn't like being under Austrian rule, but for whatever reason, they just assumed that they would stay one big happy family with all these other groups that they considered part of Greater Hungary, and that if I remember correctly, there's even a part there that relates Tisza opposing, or the Hungarians generally opposing, like increased suffrage because it would lead to them being outnumbered by the Slavic groups as opposed to the Magyars that make up Hungary proper, so to speak. I don't know. It's a very interesting consideration, I suppose. What do you think about it? What's the answer? What should the Hungarians have wanted, or what should they have done?
Bro, here's where we get to the. You remember the thing I said about not having opinions? I don't know, dude. Yeah, it's a very fraught issue in our circles, I suppose. Right? Like on the one hand, there's who said it? Was it one of the French guys, one of the French New Right guys, who said that nationalism is too big for small problems and too small for big problems?
That sounds accurate.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I get that. That doesn't sound crazy to me. And then at the same time, I mean, I get not wanting to be a subject people. I get wanting like your language to be the language that's on the street signs. I can understand why a Polish guy who loves Poland is going to be like, well, fuck the white race. If the white race means that Poland has to be erased from the map, let me burn the whole thing.
hmm
I get it. I don't know. Yeah, it's one of the things it's one of those questions that is only a very pressing current question in the internet, right? It's not a thing that normal people think about, I don't think. But yeah, it's a thing that I think about and I don't have an answer to. right? Because
Yeah.
then again, like, because how are we going to fight this? How are we going to engage in this conflict, which absolutely is on a racial level, if it's not under the umbrella of a race? And yet, I mean, when I am in various European countries, it even as an English speaker, I don't take joy in the fact that our culture and cultural references, and part of that is that the culture which is being transmitted via the English language is so gay and Jewish. But even if it was something healthy being transmitted, I wouldn't be happy about homogenization. I like local cultures. I like local specificities, and there is this homogenizing tendency, which I think is gross, but maybe it's inevitable. I don't know, Taylor. What you answer the question? You asked it. Good lord.
No. That's why I ask the questions, so I don't have to answer them.
For sure. Do you have anything on that
uh,
debate?
it's very complicated. That's it.
Yeah, yeah. It's
um,
it's it's a doozy.
I don't know. I think maybe it's something that we're in the process of collectively working out, and maybe we're just not going to have a good answer to it right now. I think it's worth considering. Again, I think the book is a great example. You kind of take it as a whole. You see all these conflicts between these different European groups: the Slavs, the Magyars, the Germans, the French, Romanians, and so on. Everyone has their little time to shine. They get to be the winner, and then their star fades a little bit, but they're still there. They're still around. They're still struggling for their own destiny. And we're kind of one big, happy, quarrelsome family with very cool, picturesque wars every once in a while. But then you have this other group of people that comes around, and they don't do the normal kind of war. They create the Soviet Republic, and they just like round people up and shoot them and try to destroy the Hungarian identity permanently. So, I think what I'm saying is kind of just a very basic, obvious point, but I think really we probably don't have an answer to the question of nationalism or petty nationalism right now. But I think that we're in the process of very slowly, in our own very slow, blundering way, we're working it out as we're confronted with the increasingly obvious fact of how alien this other group is and what happens to us when we allow them to divide us and not pay attention or let them take advantage of our divisions and our internal concerns with each other.
I have one. It's also not quite an answer, but it's like pointing towards an answer of how to approach this question of nationalism and empire. I apologize to really. I think it was Mike from Imperium Press whose argument I'm about to butcher. Oh, and maybe it's not him. So I apologize for misattributing. I'm doing a lot of apologizing today. But the thing that I read, which I thought was good, was that like trying to have moral conclusions be algorithms is just a way of dodging responsibility, right? Like if you come up with the right algorithm to decide a question like nationalism versus liberalism, national like
Yeah, it's
self-determination of all
it's
nations.
it's like
It,
endless theory selling so that you never end up going to do anything because you're waiting to until you find the perfect answers. Like
yeah,
just the Jews wait. When I come up with the perfect theory that has an answer for absolutely everything, then I'm going to go out there and everything is going to change.
then instead of you or let's say the philosopher king who has power and stuff, instead of just acting and taking the responsibility of actions upon his own soul, that responsibility gets transmuted to the principle, right? And then we're in this world of forms where it's because of the principle of the thing that we had to do. It's like, no,
Yep.
I took action. I did it. That is why it is, because I did it. And that's all there is. Whoever wrote that, I liked it. I did a bad job of explaining it. But maybe the answer to nation versus empire is to figure out each individual case by argument and threat and hopefully not too much bloodshed and just negotiating every last thing as a specific thing rather than referring to some overarching principle. I don't know.
This
Can we talk about Tisza?
Yeah, I was going to
How
say
could
something else.
go
Uh
go go?
Now that's gonna sound silly. It would have sounded better if I just said this
Oh, did I ruin your
right
timing?
after you did. Now you're gonna just like make me sound like a nerd. I was just gonna quote, "The strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must."
Yeah, I don't know. As godless heathen sort of guy, that makes more sense to me as a way of understanding the world, whether I like it or not. Is
Yeah,
that's that's what it is. Whether
I think
you
that's what it is. Yeah, and I was just gonna say that this is also part of the reason why sometimes people on the right they get really into who was like the best 20th century leader and everyone else sucked, and if only everyone else had done it Franco's way or Mussolini's way or even Hitler's way, which I'm partial to, then we would have not ended up here. But I think if you read about those people, then they're all sometimes like I have more criticisms maybe for example of Mosley than of some other people, but most of those people, like even like Franco, who's like the favorite of reactionary people who don't want to be a fascist. Like he was just a great man who seized the moment, and he did for however short a time he did save his country. And it kind of just goes to what you're saying. Like you just have to go and do and hope that it's enough.
Yep.
All right, so now let's talk about Count Tisa.
Yes, let's do it. So yeah, so this is the son of the fellow we were talking about earlier who fought in the 1848 rebellion against Austria and eventually came to he warmed up to the Austrians. He signed on to the compromise that brought Austria-Hungary into a peace that lasted from 1867 till World War One, I believe. Maybe I'm sure there were some bumps in the road along the way, but I don't think that there were any large-scale armed uprisings within that time. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. And yes, so the father, ends up as the prime minister, and when he dies, his son, the Count Tisza, who is described in this book, he inherits the family business and serves as prime minister for 30 years. Well, we'll get to how the end of his time comes about. So, what about him as a character? He's described as not vain, not a showboat, physically vigorous, engaging in things like horse racing and dueling anybody who challenged him,
I have this
and
sentence here that I think is a good summary.
go.
In short, he was a vigorous personality who combined the rigidity of a Calvinist with the sentiments of a great seigneurial landowner and with the Hungarian pride of race.
Very good. And yeah, so the part of his rule as prime minister that we're interested in is basically the run up to World War One, where after being very, very unpopular for the vast majority of his time in office, the stars align in this weird way where the Hungarians are clamoring for war, largely, as I understand it via the book, due to a general antipathy to the Slavs, which got further stirred up by the
Yeah,
Serbian
that seems to be
revolutionary
the
Gavrilo
case.
Princip. Yep. Yeah, so Gavrilo Princip kills Franz Ferdinand. The Hungarians are up in arms, clamoring for war, and they all mistakenly assume that good old unpopular stick in the mud Count Tisza, who nobody has liked for all of his reign, is one of the main architects pushing for the war within the government. And all of a sudden they're like, this is our guy. My golly, what a great guy this guy is. And only, I think it said somewhere that it was only decades after the fact that it came to light via a bunch of documents that actually he was pumping the brakes the whole time.
Yeah.
And it goes into a great deal of detail about the minutia of all that, the various concerns and points of view of the ministers who are mostly for the war, and Tisa who's saying, "Hey, we really should take into account the possible consequences of this." The thing that shines a light on the character of this man is the fact that despite his opposition, because of his honor and his scruples, he never expressed that opposition aloud, and he allowed this incorrect impression that he was one of the key architects of the war to go unanswered because of a sense of loyalty to the emperor, and to his country, and the
I think
consciousness.
specifically, yeah, he felt like we're at war. I can't do anything about it now, and people seem to be into it. So I don't want to dampen their spirits or dampen their resolve. Really, if we
Right,
have to
that
be in
that
this, then best to go into it with everything we've got.
by speaking for his own individual conscience, right, and saying what he felt in his heart, all he would really be doing was damaging his country, damaging unity, and therefore the right thing to do was to be quiet and do your duty, and that's what he did. So that's the first case where his strict old-fashioned morality led him to not be able to defend himself in the court of public opinion. And then after the war, when the masses had turned against the war and the same people who had been clamoring for blood were saying, how could these Austrians have gotten us involved in this? Well, of course, who do they turn on is the Prime Minister Tisza, who had always been unpopular. He went right back to being unpopular, and once again, because of his scruples and his unwillingness to expose private correspondence and basically name names as to who it was that actually was the architect of the war. He never spoke in his own defense, and he never said, hey, actually, I was totally against this the whole time. I was warning all the way that this was not the best move. And basically, he burned all the evidence that would exculpate him, and then he was murdered by Bolshevik Jew terrorists.
Yep,
That's the guy.
this is my favorite character in the book.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's. Are there any
I
other
I,
characters
I
that we could
appreciate
like?
the well, no, not really. Honestly, not really.
Yeah. Carolyi, Michel Carolyi, the liberal nobleman. He's not a favorite character in the sense of being anybody that we like or aspire to be like. But I mean, I also found him very vivid and fascinating.
Very compelling person, or I don't know if not necessarily compelling, but like you kind of have like a morbid fascination.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that Count Tisa is a very interesting person, and it it seems like for most of his, I don't know, you could maybe argue for his entire reign, like his way of doing things seems to work. He plays the hands that he's dealt in the best way that probably could have been done for Hungary. So I don't know, do you think that if he had been different in any way, that like the catastrophe that befell afterward could have been forestalled?
Oof. I mean, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about staving off the rise of liberalism entirely? Are we talking about preserving the old order, the old Europe
Well,
of
yeah,
aristocracy and stuff?
I guess that's part of the question. Is certainly someone who is just like the quote I read, he has that sentiments of the great landowner. So kind of like the more reactionary tendencies. But at the same time, he seems to really exemplify like the best version of that kind of person. The kind of aristocrat who genuinely feels a sense of patristic duty toward his nation. And yeah, I don't know. Person like that, I guess, is never going to be a revolutionary. Maybe isn't ever going to be able to stop revolutions, but it's good to have them, I suppose, than worse people.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about avoiding psychopath Jews massacring people for communism, then that's more of a conversation. But as far as actually preserving the old order, and maybe this is me being a lib, I don't know. Uh, Trash me in the comments. I am sort of partial to the argument from sort of economics and technological development that the fall of the old order was an inevitability. And obviously, there's something dangerous and foolish about looking back at history and claiming that it was inevitable, right? All sorts of different moments could have swung other ways. And put it this way, the understanding of history that I have is that countries that professionalized their bureaucracies and their armies outcompeted countries that didn't do those things, right? And then in order to do that, you needed to have more and more of an educated populace, things like economic development necessarily empowering a class like the bourgeoisie, who are inevitably going to start clamoring to have more of a voice in government, and that inevitably, you could put that in scare quotes if you want, the word inevitably, but that inevitably leading to something like liberalism, something like, broader suffrage, at least something like, a form of an understanding of legitimacy that doesn't come from the divine right of kings, or however it was that aristocracy and monarchy were justifying themselves. I don't know. It seems to me that the countries that did those things, that it allowed for technological development and the professionalization of the bureaucracy, the professional armies, that they would have outcompeted more countries that stuck by the older feudalistic way of doing things, and then the choice would have been either perish to an exterior foe or undertake this new revolutionary order. I don't know. That's
Yeah,
sort of my liberal opinion.
I don't know. I would tend to agree with all of that. I think it's very reasonable.
But
I had a
whether something like communism is a necessary consequence of that thing that we'll call liberalism, so that's also an interesting question. But I cut you off. Go.
Well, that was actually helpful because I was going to say I had a thought about how to transition this to talking about Caroli, and I kind of lost it. But it was something along those lines. You have the let's just, for sake of discussion, let's just say inevitable transition to the liberal economic and political mode. And what does it kind of immediately bring? It allows the rise of people like Mihail Karoli, who is this. It's actually interesting contrast because Tisza he's described as from a kind of like pretty lower aristocratic lineage, kind of like one of the lesser aristocratic families, whereas Karoli is like one of the great aristocratic families of Hungary. And it culminates in this guy who is like he's physically deformed, which is described as being a part of his general antisocial character. And he's very energetic. He's not very good at anything, but he's very energetic and he's very sure of the fact that he is meant to be a great person. So he is kind of the transition period between like, the fall of the old order, the old aristocratic system, and he is kind of like a very, very brief liberal figure, and then he ends up being swallowed up in the tide of communism. So, do you have any thoughts based on that?
Well, I was definitely thinking of. Are you familiar with the Duke d'Orleans, Louis Philippe, who renamed himself Louis Equality?
That's funny, but not very. I feel like I've probably heard that in my life, but I couldn't tell you anything.
It's a type of character that shows up. So he was the Orleans branch of the French royal family. He was one of the next in line for. He was pretty up high on the line of succession, put it that way. And yet he was this liberal aristocrat who sort of entertained himself by being a patron to all these dirty scumbag revolutionary type guys, and he did a lot to help bring about the French Revolution, and soon enough it got a little too hot for him when they started chopping off heads. In his case, he made it through, and I gotta check this. Yeah, okay, had to check it. His son actually ended up becoming the king of France after the Restoration. I don't know. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that this is a type of character that we find in revolutionary situations. Maybe it's what Moldbug calls the dark elite, or whatever dumb phrase he uses. There's always somebody way at the top who gets
Is it
I
not like a Lord of the Rings reference of some kind? Is it the
dark
Dark Elves
elves.
or something?
Yeah, man, that's what it is.
I've never read Moldbug. I just know he does that stuff. So if I accidentally got it right, it's not because I've read anything he's written.
I've read things he's written. Um, yeah, so Cuddly is one of these guys. One of these guys with enough money and a high enough opinion of himself that
I feel like I
being
have to say so that people don't, don't think that completely unfamiliar with Tolkien. Dark elves are not a thing. That's like a general fantasy thing. I don't think that there's such a thing in Tolkien. Just have to
yeah,
say that
that's
for my own credibility.
hey, very good. What do they have? I think they have high elves and like wood elves.
Yeah, that's more like it.
Yeah. Ha! Yet again, I couldn't think of a way to be anti-Semitic about that. Moldbug, you were wrong about Tolkien. Haha. Man, I'm totally off track. But yeah, Guttle Yi is a character, long
Well,
story short, that I
so
recognize from our context as well, right? These sort of upper class
yeah,
people who, give money and time and credibility to street apes who, otherwise no one would ever listen to them, but just to entertain themselves, these upper class people will set things on fire, I guess.
like a Roosevelt type character, maybe.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give it a maybe. Yeah, wow.
Well,
Yeah, that could be a
they're both physically deformed as well, so you have that.
Yeah, have you ever ah is that something that people argue that Roosevelt was the way that he was because he was
I
crippled?
have no idea. I literally came up with this right now. I have
Yeah.
no idea.
Hey, I'm willing. This is a podcast. It's the land of hot takes. Let's
Yeah.
say that that's what it is.
Okay. Well, this kind of reminds me of what you were just talking about a few minutes ago, and I agree. It's very, very important. It's crucial to not look at the past and say, everything had to happen this way. But it's certainly a tremendous temptation for us to do that. And it does seem like there's some reasons for that, right? Like over centuries of a certain kind of system existing, like the older, more aristocratic system, it just accumulates redundancy, it accumulates, uh,
Contradictions, to use the
yeah,
Marxist word.
sure, sure. Contradictions, sloth, people who are just lose the virtues that created it and that it was meant to sustain. And so it seems like eventually it's just the meme about good times create weak men, right? It eventually will spit out a weak man who will very often be the stepping stone for something worse, for the bad times. And then hopefully the bad times create strong men, although not always, I would argue.
You're real dark with it today. Yeah, it's you're not wrong. Yeah, so in this case, the weak man Karolyi begins gathering these Jews around him. It's pretty staggering the percentage of these destructive figures who are actually Jewish. Yeah, so he starts gathering these revolutionary Jews around him, and when he
Anti-Semite surprise that he's becoming even more anti-Semitic than previously thought possible. Happens every day.
Yeah, it does. So look, what happens with Karolyi is that after the loss of the war, there's this swell of popular opinion against the Austrians, right? Karolyi has always been pro-French, anti-Austrian, as well as being pro-universal suffrage, a liberal of his time, not necessarily a socialist radical, although he would have them in his house and give them money and stuff. And he comes back from exile. I feel like he was in exile during the war. Maybe he was in Hungary, but he takes advantage of the
I don't
situation.
think he was in exile. I think he was just kind of like doing the rounds in Western countries because again he really wanted to be someone important. So he just decided to act like he was and go talk to the whatever Western leader or more likely just diplomat would see him kind of on behalf of Hungary, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, which also is I mean, I'm sure that's not the only time that's happened, right? Well, I guess the guy that the American government put in charge of Iraq is a funny and sad example of that. I forget his name. Any number of examples of people who really have no significance at all, who wander into the right office and end up getting a weird amount of support. Long
Take
story
note,
short,
listener. If the deformed liberals can do it, then you have no excuse. You better be somebody.
here, here. Do you have a good account of him taking power? Because I sort of forgot the minutia of all that.
I don't think the minutia are all that important. I think that he basically is the right. he's in the right place at the right time. Like you said, there's just this right cocktail of public opinion with dissatisfaction with the war, all the historical resentments against the Austrians, and it all just kind of comes together. And I believe he forms this, I think it's called the National Council, with a bunch of Jews and other people, and is basically like preparing to be the new Hungarian government. And then it just happens sooner than he thought because the people are so fed up and he's able to take advantage of it. It's actually interesting now that I'm thinking about it. He's telephones, I guess, the emperor, I believe. And the emperor kind of empowers him to take charge to prevent like a revolution. And then just like that same day or the next day, he telephones the emperor and he gets himself released from his like oath of loyalty to the emperor. In so doing, Hungary becomes independent.
Another interesting fact. So it's one of those things where you reveal a person's true beliefs by their actions. He disarms Hungarian troops as they're coming home and basically
Oh yeah,
disbands the
yep.
Hungarian army, leaving them totally defenseless against their former subject nationalities, who naturally the Romanians and the Croatians and the Slovaks immediately start taking advantage of the chaos to pursue their own national interests. God bless them. And I don't know, just a great example of a liberal who actually really did believe the stuff about like, oh, we'll have a civic identity. We'll all be able to vote in the civic republic of Hungary, and we'll all be happy together. It did not turn out like that.
No, not at all. I'm trying to find that place because there's some funny parts to the book. The author just kind of like has a way of whenever there's something particularly silly that happens, he has kind of like a dry, sarcastic way of relating it, which is pretty funny.
You know, like for example, there was one liberal writer who, and somewhat upper class, who his family employed a wet nurse for his baby. And he put two and two together that like, oh, if she's a wet nurse, that means she must have a baby of her own.
Oh
And here
yeah,
she is. Yeah, I guess it's not funny unless you're like me and
it's
sicko, but
dark. It's darkly funny.
yeah, because this well-intentioned liberal is like, "Oh, you must have a baby too. Where's your baby? Her baby's back in her village, and she came to sell her milk to an upper
Hmm.
class baby for money." Which I mean, I agree with the liberal in the anecdote that that's not great. We're not a fan of that in the ethno state. But of course, his solution is to send for this woman's baby from the village and make her feed two babies at once, and both of the babies die because she doesn't have
Yep.
enough milk to feed them both. I think it's the same guy who demanded that equal numbers of rifles be given out to the Hungarian and Romanian villagers,
Yes. Yep.
and immediately,
Which had
with
predictable
predictable
results.
results. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It would be funny if it wasn't, real and
Hmm.
Europe.
Yeah.
Uh, you find what you were looking for?
Yeah, so the Karoli, he had a war minister, Colonel Lindner, his war minister, who was a brave soldier but soured by 4 years of campaigning, declared to his assembled officers when they came to swear fidelity to the new government, "We thought that the ideal for which we were fighting was worthy of the sacrifices which we made. I, your responsible minister, tell you it was false. A new victorious life has been born under the star of pacifism. In the future, I do not wish to see a single soldier." And then, alarmed by the excessive pacifism of his Minister of War, Karoli dismissed him. But he himself experienced the destructive influences by which he was surrounded. He took resolutions which were quite as strange. A few troops returning from the front in good order with their officers and arms after having passed safely. When they arrived in Budapest, Karoli disarmed them. In this way, he lost both effectives and material, leaving Hungary defenseless against the enterprises of her impatient neighbors. So, yeah, a lot of just silly stuff happens.
Yeah, and then you end up in a situation where, with Hungary, Austria-Hungary having been one integrated economy, you end up with a situation where Budapest has no wood for fires and no food coming in from the countryside. And meanwhile, the former subject nationalities are on the march, and that's the instability that the Jew embezzler, traitor, Bolshevik Bela Kun takes advantage of to make his move.
Yep.
Did you have more about Karolyi?
No, that's it. I think I think that's good. Okay, we can probably start. I don't think we need to do the same kind of character review of Bela Kun unless you want to.
Well, we could
Um,
just say like he's a standard Jew, fill in the blank with all of the stereotypes, and it's that. It's crazy.
yeah,
I mean, like the dude is literally embezzling money everywhere he goes. I don't know if they mentioned any sex perversions, but I'd believe it. Just a real look at a picture of the guy. Jesus.
hmm
So, yeah, so he ends up a prisoner of war, gets sent to Siberia, and makes friends with some of his co-ethnics who are Bolsheviks. And yeah, he starts getting money to organize a prisoner battalion to fight in the Red Army, starts a propaganda paper, once again is accused of embezzling within the prison camp, which is great. And yeah, he comes back to Budapest after the war with a bunch of Russian money. Well, let's not besmirch the name of the Russians, I suppose, with a bunch of Bolshevik Jewish money,
yes.
and starts agitating. Yeah, so this section of the book, I got a little confused by. There's like a whole swarm of them that he mentions one after another.
The Bolshevik Jews.
Yeah, it's it's
Yeah.
it's hard for me to keep them all straight, but it's like a catalog, right? Where he catalogs numerous instances of the same type,
hmm
just to I don't know, maybe if I had been coming into the book a little less sure of my convictions, just to really hammer the point home about the sort of people that these were.
Yeah, generally not the most biologically fit specimens. It's interesting. I think even when it comes to the Gentiles, the Hungarians, when they describe the Lenin's boys, which is like this red terror group that's created, the leader, I think it's for that group that he selects like dark-faced, dark-haired people because he finds the blonde ones too squeamish, I suppose. I thought that was
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
So a lot of bio-Leninism going on, you might say. Is that also a mold bug thing?
No,
No, that's
that's
not.
oh, I can't come up with the name of that guy, but it's a different blogger.
Yeah. So Bela Kun, he eventually comes to power. Not long after Karoli comes to power, the Bolsheviks are able to take advantage of the situation further.
Oh, one
So
more thing.
yeah.
So it's interesting to note that when the Entente betrays Karoli as he sees it by allowing the subject nationalities to dismember historic Hungary, he releases Bela Kun, and he's on the record as like, well,
Oh
I'm going
right.
to
Yeah,
try and trigger a
he
flood of
keeps threatening
Bolshevism.
them. Yeah, he
Yep.
keeps he sees this as like his threat. It's like, if you don't give me what I want, then I'm going to release Bolshevism on Europe. And he seems to genuinely not care all that much if like or he seems to not give a lot of thought to like what's going to end up with him in this situation either. Like it almost seems like he's honestly more motivated by like, if I can't have this, then nobody can have it. I'm just going to smash it.
Indeed. Did we want to say anything about the specifics of the?
I just wanted to read this section, which I feel like is a good illustration. This is at the end of chapter 8. So, this is basically summarizing the coming to power of the Bolsheviks. Passing in one short quarter of an hour from prison to the government of the state, Bela Kun and his friends installed an executive council in place of the former cabinet. The members of this council took the name of Commissaries of the People. Bela Kun conferred the presidency of it upon Alexander Garbai, an entirely obscure personage, but who had, in Bela's eyes, the advantage of being a Christian and so masking the Semitic nature of this communist movement. Of 26 commissaries, 18 were Jews, an unwarrantable number if one considers that there are only 1.5 million Jews among the 20 million inhabitants of Hungary. These 18 men took the direction of the Bolshevist government into their own hands. The others were merely figureheads. It was said jokingly at Budapest that they only appeared at the Council of the Jewish Republic to carry on its business on the sacred Sabbath day, and were thus like the Christian servants in Jewish households from Friday to Saturday who do the work there which the law of Moses forbids the Jews to do themselves. Bela Kun had contented himself with the title of Commissary for Foreign Affairs, a piece of sharp practice which deceived no one. After the dynasty of Arpad, after Saint Stephen and his sons, after the Anjous, the Hunyadis, and the Habsburgs, there was a king of Israel in Hungary today. So that summarizes what happened. And then, I think we're running a little short on time here, but it spends basically a chapter describing the really immense changes that they try to bring about very, very quickly to Hungarian society. All the typical communist stuff, like upending everything, completely disenfranchising the bourgeois and just robbing them of all their assets, their money, even very nearly the clothes off their backs, and then instituting a red terror, rounding up enemies or just like anyone who looks at them wrong that day and murdering them all. It's typical stuff, but at the same time, it's important that it's there because it's pretty amazing to consider like so drastic a transformation in so short a period of time.
Yeah, that's the essence of the events of the book. And yeah, it closes, as we've mentioned, with the sort of retrospective dialogue between these two ideal types, maybe we'll call them, these personifications of Jewry and Christendom in two characters, which,
Yeah,
you should read it yourselves, guys. It's a lot of it is very reminiscent of what's going on right now. There's the classic observations about disproportionate Jewish power and the tried and true response of that's because we're smarter and harder working, you're just jealous. There's a line that I've written down that I liked that we wish to remain ourselves, good or bad, intelligent or stupid. A number of great quotes that they hold up today just as they held up in the context that they were thought up. What were you going to say, Taylor?
I forget. But do you have any other, we can get into closing thoughts. I guess I would go off of that for mine. I think it is a very interesting section of the book, and the whole book is very interesting for all the reasons that you've given. I think it's worth keeping in mind that dialogue between the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian, but really it's a Gentile perspective that's really most fundamental there. It is written by a Gentile, so it's partly his own idea of what the Jew would say and why, which I think is interesting to think about as you read it. I guess let me give you my thoughts first, and then you can have the last word. It's a very interesting book. I like the way it's written. It's very readable and it's very compact. There's, like you said, there's a lot of stuff that it illustrates and that it relates that's very important. And kind of to get back to that dialogue and get back to some of the things we were talking about at the beginning, one thing that is one of my biggest takeaways from it is you get this feeling of the Jews of the titular Israel being, and maybe this also goes a little bit to explain why, like we mentioned at the beginning, like some of the language on the author's part against the Jews is maybe doesn't always sound as strong as we'd think. You get this feeling that the Jews are a far more ancient people than the Hungarians, and they, unlike the Hungarians, they have a plan, even if it isn't a conscious plan or like a plan in the normal sense. Like from the very beginning of the Jews arriving in Hungary and settling in the villages and then settling in Budapest and creating the financial quarter, like there's just this driving feeling of intentionality behind all their actions, and you don't know exactly where it's heading, and maybe they don't either, other than there's that one passage about the New Jerusalem and waiting for the Messiah, and they get tired of waiting for heaven in the next life, so they try to drag it down to this one. And I think you can get kind of frustrated with how reactionary the Hungarians are and how they kind of just like let this all happen. And at the end, when the Hungarian Soviet Republic collapses, it's largely due to outside forces that come in. Even though in real life, I think or historically I should say, it didn't control that much of Hungary. And afterwards there's these pogroms, these brutal repressions against the Jews by the peasants and everybody else. But, have the Hungarians learned their lesson? I don't know. Well, what is the lesson? I think that's a question worth considering, because I think it doesn't, whatever the lesson is, it's not something that comes easy to the Gentile character. And it's has something to do with some realization of just how different these people are and how deadly their way of life, however well intentioned in their own minds or something. I mean, that's another thing we talked about at the beginning. That's kind of like that's our way of analyzing the world, of thinking that we can relate to people's motivations and we can explain them in ways that make sense to us and that we can kind of see ourselves in, right? It's like, oh, well, this person doesn't think they're a villain. They think they're doing something good. That's, that's something I can understand and relate to. Well, I mean, what if it's not? What if that's just a completely insufficient way of understanding who these people are and why they do what they do? So, I would wish that there had been more the Hungarians in the story. And again, it is history, but it's I think it's also valuable that it's kind of written like a story. It kind of helps you think about it in a different way, I think. I'd wish that they'd been a more proactive character in their own liberation from Israel. And just like I wish that we all would be, our race collectively would be a more proactive character than it currently is being. So with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, I would say that if there's a lesson, then maybe it's this. It's a quote from the Gentile to the Jew. You are never hampered by a multiplicity of feelings which our special and particular past has created in us, by a tradition which, though it is unconscious, is all powerful, and may cause us to sacrifice our personal interests and even our lives in defense of things to which you will forever remain strangers. There are certain realities which you grasp at once with marvelous shrewdness. There are others, and they are the most important, relating to our souls, which you Jews will never understand, any more than we can pride ourselves upon penetrating the inmost thoughts of your hearts. Once again, like yesterday, and I'm sure that for the listener it won't be 2 days successively, but like the conversation we had yesterday, and this will probably be a theme in many of the books we read, you are what you are. You can't be anything other than what you are. And if you try, then the thing that you will be a pale reflection, a degenerate copy of the thing you're trying to be. So really what you should do is be what you are.
That works. Yeah. Again, we recommend everyone get the book, and thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next one.